6 years of dedication, turning failed territories into gold mines. I thought my numbers would protect me. Instead, he turned that quarterly meeting into a public execution, ending my career in front of 20 silent colleagues. Before I could even speak, my timid intern stood up, opened her laptop, and said something that drained all color from his face. I didn't know that moment was just the opening shot of a revenge plan that had been quietly brewing for months, one that would flip the entire power structure of our company upside down. My name is Lena Foster, and until 10:30 this morning, I was the Director of Strategic Accounts at Meridian Customer Solutions. The quarterly review meeting had started like any other 20 executives crammed into the glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor, the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly behind Grant Huxley as he commanded the head of the table. I was halfway through presenting my team's numbers when Grant raised his hand, that familiar patronizing gesture I'd seen him use on others but never on me. "That's enough, Lena." His voice cut through my presentation like a blade through silk. "We need to talk about your future here, or rather, the lack of it." The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. My laser pointer trembled in my hand as I clicked it off, the red dot disappearing from the projection screen where my revenue charts showing 18% growth suddenly seemed meaningless. "I'm sorry," the words came out as barely a whisper. Around the table, my colleagues studied their laptops, their coffee cups, anything but me, even Marcus, who'd grabbed drinks with me just last Friday to celebrate landing the Morrison Industries account, wouldn't meet my eyes. Grant stood, his 6'3" frame casting a shadow across the conference table. "Your performance has been disappointing. The board has decided to restructure your department. Effective immediately, you're being let go." Disappointing, I felt my knees threaten to buckle. The same strategies that had saved 3 failing regions, the personalized customer journey model that had become our company's cornerstone, suddenly disappointing. "Grant, there must be some mistake. My numbers are irrelevant when you can't align with company vision," he interrupted, his gray eyes cold as January steel. "Security will escort you to clear your desk after this meeting. We thank you for your service." 6 years. 6 years of 70-hour weeks, of missing birthdays and canceling vacations, of pouring everything I had into this company, and he was dismissing me like I was an intern who'd fumbled the coffee order. That's when Sophie Hale stood up. Sophie, my quiet intern, who'd been with us only 4 months, who took notes in every meeting and rarely spoke unless spoken to. She rose from her seat near the door, her usually hunched shoulders suddenly straight, her pale hands steady as she opened her laptop. "Mr. Huxley," she said, her voice carrying a strength I'd never heard before. "Before you finalize this decision, I think everyone in this room should see something." Grant's face shifted, just slightly. A muscle twitched near his jaw. "Miss Hale, this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time." Sophie turned her laptop toward the room, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Especially since Miranda Cross is downstairs in the lobby, waiting to discuss the personalized customer journey model with its actual creator." The color drained from Grant's face so fast I thought he might faint. His hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "What did you just say?" His voice had lost all its commanding authority, reduced to something raw and desperate. Sophie's smile was small, but sharp as a scalpel. "Miranda Cross, you know, the CEO of Apex Global Solutions, the woman you've been secretly pitching Lena's model to for the past 3 weeks. She received some very interesting documentation last night about the true origins of the intellectual property you've been claiming as your own." The room erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as executives leaned forward, whispers rippling through the space like wildfire. Grant's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "How dare you?" he started, but Sophie wasn't finished. "How dare I what?" "Tell the truth." She pulled up an email thread on her screen, projecting it onto the main display. There it was, Grant's correspondence with Miranda, selling my model, my work, with his name stamped all over it. Or how dare I contact Ms. Cross directly with the original documentation, timestamps, and development notes that prove Lena Foster is the sole architect of the model you've been shopping around. My legs finally gave out, and I sank into the nearest chair. This couldn't be real. Quiet. Unassuming, Sophie had just detonated a bomb in the middle of what was supposed to be my professional funeral. Grant's face had progressed from white to a dangerous red. "You're an intern. You have no idea what you're talking about. This is corporate espionage." "No," Sophie interrupted, her voice steady as granite. "This is justice, and Miranda Cross is very interested in hearing more about it. In fact, she should be walking through that door right about—" The conference room door opened, but let me rewind 6 years, to when I first walked through Meridian's revolving doors, a 29-year-old woman with a marketing degree from state school and more ambition than sense. I'd grown up in Millfield, Indiana, population 3,000 on a good day, where the biggest business was the John Deere dealership my uncle ran. My parents thought I was crazy, leaving the certainty of small-town life for Chicago's corporate jungle. I started as a receptionist, yes. The director of strategic accounts, who just got publicly fired, began by answering phones and scheduling meetings for men who couldn't remember my name. They called me sweetheart, or hon, or simply snapped their fingers when they needed coffee. I smiled through it all. Because I knew something they didn't, I was studying them, learning their language, understanding their game. Every night after my shift ended at 6, I'd stay until midnight, taking online courses in data analytics, customer psychology, strategic planning. I lived on ramen and determination. My studio apartment in Pilsen, barely bigger than the conference room where my career just imploded. My laptop was ancient, held together with duct tape, but it was enough to build models, run simulations, test theories. The breakthrough came 18 months in. I'd noticed patterns in our customer complaint data that everyone else dismissed as random noise. Working weekends for 3 months straight, I developed what would become the personalized customer journey model, an algorithm that predicted customer needs before they even articulated them, creating intervention points that transformed dissatisfaction into loyalty. I still remember the first time I presented it, not in the executive conference room. Of course, I cornered Tom Bradley, then VP of Operations, by the elevators at 7:45 one evening. 30 seconds to pitch before the doors opened. He gave me 5 minutes in his office. Those 5 minutes turned into 2 hours. Within a month, they tested my model on our worst-performing region, the Pacific Northwest Territory, that had been hemorrhaging clients for 2 years. 3 months later, that region posted 32% growth. 6 months after that, I wasn't a receptionist anymore. Grant Huxley entered my life like a savior. He'd just been promoted to VP of Customer Development, brought in from our New York office with a reputation for discovering talent. He took notice of my model's success, invited me to present at the national conference, introduced me as the future of customer relations. "Lena," he'd said over cocktails at the Palmer House after my first big presentation, "you're too smart to be stuck in middle management. Stick with me, and I'll make sure you get the recognition you deserve." And for a while, he did. Grant pulled me into strategy meetings, included me in calls with C-suite executives, even had me join the task force for our 5-year growth plan. When he promoted me to director, bypassing 3 people with more seniority, he called it recognizing exceptional talent regardless of tenure. I was too grateful to notice the warning signs, how he always scheduled my presentations right before his, how my detailed reports would disappear into his office, emerging later as executive summaries with his name prominently displayed, how he'd introduce my ideas with phrases like, "as I was explaining to Lena earlier," or "building on something my team suggested." The real shift came after the National Customer Service Excellence Summit in Boston. Miranda Cross had been the keynote speaker, and afterwards, she'd approached me directly. "That model you presented," she'd said, her eyes sharp with interest. "That's revolutionary. We should talk." Grant appeared at my elbow within seconds, arms sliding possessively around my shoulders. "Ms. Cross, how wonderful to meet you. I'm Grant Huxley, Lena's supervisor. I've been overseeing the model's development from the beginning." I should have corrected him then, should have spoken up when he handed Miranda his business card instead of mine, when he scheduled a follow-up call that I wasn't invited to, but I was still that small-town girl, still believing that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded, that Grant was protecting my interests. Over the following months, my territory assignments began to shift. The high-value accounts I'd cultivated were redistributed for load balancing. New performance metrics appeared, ones that mysteriously didn't align with my strengths. Grant started scheduling critical meetings during my client visits, then expressing concern about my absence to other executives. "Lena's brilliant," I overheard him telling our CEO at the holiday party, his voice carrying just enough to ensure I'd hear. "But she lacks the strategic vision for senior leadership. Still, I'm committed to developing her potential." Developing my potential while stealing my work. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me as I watched my career slowly suffocate under his mentorship. Each opportunity he gave me actually another rope around my neck. The darkness truly began to descend after Boston. Within a week of the conference, Grant implemented a new communication protocol. All external contacts, especially with potential partners or competitors, had to be routed through his office. "For consistency in messaging," he explained to the team, his smile never reaching his eyes when he looked at me. I discovered he'd been intercepting my emails from Miranda Cross. Her assistant called my personal cell one evening, confused why I hadn't responded to 3 dinner invitations. When I checked my work email, there was nothing. It claimed it was a server glitch, but Sophie would later show me the administrative logs Grant had been accessing my account, deleting messages before I could see them. The account redistributions accelerated. Morrison Industries, my crown jewel that generated $2 million in annual revenue, was reassigned to Derek, one of Grant's golf buddies. "You're stretched too thin, Lena," Grant said during our one-on-one. "I'm doing you a favor, letting you focus on strategic initiatives." Strategic initiatives that never materialized. Instead, I was handed the toxic accounts the clients everyone else had given up on, the contracts bleeding money, the relationships damaged beyond repair. "If anyone can turn these around, it's you," Grant said, knowing full well it was impossible. My quarterly numbers began their engineered descent, from 18% growth to 12, then 8, then barely breaking even. In meetings, Grant would shake his head sadly at my reports. "Lena's going through a rough patch," he'd tell the others, voice dripping with false concern. "We're working closely to identify the issues." The isolation was surgical in its precision. Lunch invitations stopped coming. My opinions in meetings were met with polite but dismissive nods. Colleagues who once sought my advice now avoided eye contact in the hallways. Grant had painted a masterpiece of professional destruction, and I was both the canvas and the audience. 3 months ago, I found Emma Fitzgerald crying in the parking garage at 9:30 at night. Emma had been Director of Strategic Partnerships before her sudden resignation 2 years earlier. "He did the same thing to me," she whispered, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Grant, he took my supplier diversification strategy, presented it to the board as his own. When I complained to HR, he had documentation showing I'd been underperforming for months. She wasn't the only one. Through careful research and quiet conversations, I uncovered a pattern. Jennifer Reeves, who'd developed our customer retention framework, gone. Aaliyah Thompson, who'd revolutionized our complaint resolution system, transferred to the Denver office after being demoted. Sarah Kim, the brilliant analyst who'd created our predictive modeling system, terminated for failure to meet expectations. All women, all innovative, all threats to Grant's carefully constructed empire built on stolen brilliance. The final twist of the knife came last month. I was working late, trying to salvage the Henderson account, when I noticed Grant's office light was still on. His voice carried through the thin walls, and I heard my model being discussed. Not just discussed, sold. "The personalized customer journey model represents a paradigm shift," Grant was saying. "I've been developing it for 3 years now, refining the algorithm through multiple iterations." My algorithm, my iterations, my sleepless nights and weekend work. He was on a call with someone important, I could tell by his tone, the way he laughed too loud at their jokes, the careful way he chose his words. "Miranda, I appreciate your interest. Yes, if I were to bring this model to Apex, it would require a senior position. Naturally, Chief Innovation Officer has a nice ring to it." Miranda Cross. He was negotiating his exit using my work as currency. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, ceramic pieces scattering like my career prospects. Grant's door opened, and he saw me there, surrounded by broken porcelain and spilled coffee. "Working late again, Lena." His smile was predatory. "Careful, That desperate dedication is showing. It's not a good look." He stepped over the mess and walked away, whistling. That night, I seriously considered quitting, just walking away, letting him win, starting over somewhere else. But then I thought about Emma, Jennifer, Aaliyah, Sarah. How many others had there been? How many more would there be? I started documenting everything, every email, every memo, every presentation with my original timestamps. I built a forensic trail of my model's creation. From the first scattered notes to the final implementation, I thought I was preparing for a legal battle, maybe a complaint to the board. I never imagined salvation would come from the quietest person in the office. Sophie Hale had been watching too, but unlike me, she'd been preparing for war from day one. Sophie first approached me on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before my professional execution. I was alone in the break room at 8:45, staring at a vending machine coffee that tasted like liquid disappointment, when she appeared in the doorway. "He's going to fire you at the quarterly review," she said without preamble. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me." Sophie stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Gone was the timid intern who fumbled with the copier and apologized for existing. This Sophie had steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. "Grant, he's already submitted the paperwork to HR. They're processing your termination. Effective date pending his announcement. He wants it public, wants everyone to see. It's part of his pattern." "How could you possibly know?" "Because I'm not really an intern." She pulled out her phone, showing me an email thread. "Well, I am, technically, but I'm here for a very specific reason. My sister was Jennifer Reeves. Jennifer Reeves, the director of strategic partnerships, whose career Grant had destroyed 2 years ago. After Grant stole her work and ruined her reputation, Jennifer spent 6 months unable to get hired anywhere. His reach in the industry is toxic. She finally landed something in Seattle, but at half her previous salary. Sophie's hands clenched around her phone. She used to call me crying at 2 a.m, wondering what she'd done wrong. It took therapy to convince her that being brilliant wasn't her mistake. I sank into a chair, the weight of it all crushing. "So you came here to, get revenge?" "To get justice, there's a difference." Sophie sat across from me, pulling out a laptop. "I've been documenting everything since day one. Every meeting where Grant claimed your ideas. Every email where he CC'd himself on your work. Every time he accessed systems he shouldn't have." She turned the screen toward me. It was a digital maze of evidence screenshots, access logs, email forwards, even audio recordings. "You recorded him," I gasped. "Illinois is a 2-party consent state for private conversations," Sophie said carefully, "but public meetings in corporate offices with no expectation of privacy. That's different. Everything I have is legal and admissible." She showed me more. Grant's pattern spread across years, 7 women in total, all pushed out after their innovations were absorbed into his portfolio. But there was something else, something bigger. "Look at this." Sophie pulled up a financial document. "Every time Grant steals someone's work and leverages it for his advancement, Meridian's stock takes a hit 6 months later. Why? Because the real innovators are gone, and Grant can't actually execute on the ideas he's stolen. He's a parasite killing his host." "This is comprehensive," I managed, my mind racing. "It gets better." Sophie's smile was sharp. "Remember when Grant intercepted your emails from Miranda Crosswell? He didn't know I was Jennifer's emergency contact at her old company email, Miranda's assistant. When she couldn't reach you, reached out to Jennifer's old contacts looking for you. The message found its way to me. You've been in contact with Miranda. For 2 weeks now. She's very interested in the truth about the personalized customer journey model, especially since Grant's version has some fatal flaws he doesn't understand because he didn't actually create it." My heart was pounding. "What flaws?" "The ones you deliberately built in as safeguards. The authentication protocols that require your specific biometric data to access the full algorithm. The portions of code that reference your personal optimization formula. Grant's been trying to sell Miranda a car he doesn't have the keys to." I stared at Sophie in amazement. When I'd built those safeguards, I'd thought I was just being paranoid, protecting my work from potential hackers. I never imagined they'd protect me from internal theft. "Miranda wants to meet with you," Sophie continued. "The real you, not Grant's sanitized version. She's already suspicious his technical knowledge is surface level at best, and she's too smart not to notice. But we need to time this perfectly. The quarterly review, I breathed, understanding dawning. Exactly. Grant wants an audience for your humiliation. We'll give him one. But the ending won't be what he scripted. Sophie pulled out a folder, thick with documentation. I've prepared everything your original development notes, the authentication protocols, the email trails, even affidavits from Emma and the others who were willing to speak up. They agreed to that. They've been waiting for someone to fight back. You're not just saving yourself, Lena, you're breaking a cycle. I looked at this young woman, barely 23, who'd orchestrated something I couldn't have imagined. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Because you needed to be desperate enough to fight dirty, Sophie said simply. 3 weeks ago, you still believed in the system. You thought HR would help, or the board would notice, or karma would intervene. Now you know better. Now you're ready to burn it all down. She was right. The Lena from 6 months ago would have been horrified at the thought of public confrontation, of corporate warfare. But that Lena hadn't watched her life's work stolen piece by piece, hadn't seen her career methodically destroyed by someone she trusted. What do you need me to do? I asked. Sophie's grin was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in months. Just show up to that quarterly review, and when Grant starts his performance, let me handle the opening act. You'll know when it's time for your solo. The final piece fell into place 5 days before the quarterly review. I was in my office at 6:20 in the morning, the building nearly empty, when Sophie burst through my door. We have a problem, she said, closing the door behind her. Grant moved up his meeting with Miranda. He's presenting to her tomorrow, not next week. My stomach dropped. Then we've lost, if he gets to her first with his version. Unless we give him precisely what he's after. A sharp light flickered in Sophie's eyes. I've been approaching this the wrong way. We don't need to prevent him from meeting Miranda. We just need to let him create his own downfall. She pulled out her laptop, showing me an email she'd drafted. This goes to Grant from a spoofed Miranda Cross email account. Don't worry. It's just for show. We won't actually send it from her address, but Grant won't know that. It confirms their meeting but requests specific technical details about the model's deep architecture. Details he doesn't have, I said, understanding dawning. Details only you know. But here's the beautiful part. I've been watching his patterns. When Grant doesn't know something, he doesn't admit it. He improvises. He makes it up. And Miranda Cross has a photographic memory and zero tolerance for bullshit. We spent the next 3 hours crafting the perfect questions. Technical landmines that would expose Grant's ignorance, the neural network weight distributions, the customer sentiment analysis protocols, the predictive behavioral matrices that I'd spent months perfecting. He'll try to get these answers from me, I said. Let him proceed. Give him just enough space to reveal his own mistakes. Sophie opened another file. These are the almost correct responses. They might sound convincing to someone unfamiliar with the system, but Miranda will recognize right away that they're wrong. That's diabolical. That's justice. My sister taught me that sometimes you have to let people reveal their true nature. Grant's ego is his weakness. He can't admit he doesn't understand something, especially not to a woman. The next day, I watched Grant scramble. He cornered me by the elevators at lunch, sweat beading on his forehead. Lena, I need you to walk me through the technical specifications of the model. Miranda's asking for details about implementation. I played my part perfectly, confused but helpful. Which aspects, the customer journey mapping or the predictive analytics? All of it, everything. I gave him the poisoned answers Sophie and I had prepared, watching him frantically take notes on his phone, technical-sounding nonsense that would crumble under an expert's scrutiny. He was so desperate, he didn't even question why I was being helpful. That evening, Sophie showed me the recording. Yes, she'd managed to get a recording. Miranda's assistant, sympathetic to our cause after hearing Jennifer's story, had left her phone on speaker accidentally during Grant's presentation. Grant's voice was confident at first, walking through my model as if he'd birthed it himself. Then Miranda started asking questions, real questions, technical questions. Can you explain the sentiment weighting algorithm? Of course, it uses a a progressive filtering system with weighted averages based on historical data points. Interesting, and the correlation coefficients, standard deviation models with dynamic adjustment protocols. You could hear Miranda's silence, deadly as a blade. Mr. Huxley, do you actually understand the mathematics behind this model? I oversee its implementation. That's not what I asked. The recording ended with Grant stammering excuses and Miranda ending the meeting 15 minutes early. She knows, Sophie said. Now we need to make sure everyone else does too. We had 2 days left. Sophie coordinated with Jennifer's old contacts. Emma, Aaliyah, even Sarah Kim from Denver. They all had pieces of evidence, fragments of Grant's pattern. Sophie assembled them into a comprehensive dossier that read like a corporate crime thriller. But the masterstroke was Miranda herself. Sophie had been in contact with her throughout, not as an intern, but as Jennifer Reeves's sister seeking justice. Miranda, it turned out, had her own history with men like Grant. She'd built Apex Global by crushing parasites who fed off genuine innovation. I'll be at your quarterly review, Miranda told me during a secret phone call the night before. Grant invited me to see his team in action. He has no idea what's coming. I barely slept that night. 6 years of my life had led to this moment. Every humiliation, every stolen idea, every moment of self-doubt, it all came down to 10:30 on a Friday morning. Sophie found me in the bathroom at 10:15, throwing up from nerves. You can do this, she said, handing me a paper towel. Remember, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for Jennifer, for Emma, for every woman whose brilliance was stolen by mediocre men who thought they deserved it more. What if it doesn't work? What if Grant spins it somehow? Then we go to Plan B, the Wall Street Journal. Their investigative reporter is very interested in a story about systematic intellectual property theft and gender discrimination at a publicly traded company. Sophie squeezed my shoulder. But it won't come to that. Grant's about to learn what happens when you build an empire on stolen foundations. We walked to the conference room together. Through the glass walls, I could see the executives gathering, Grant at the head of the table, preening like a peacock, and in the corner, almost unnoticed, Miranda Cross in a subtle navy suit, watching everything with hawk eyes. Ready? Sophie asked. I thought about small-town Indiana, about the girl who'd believed hard work was enough. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Let's burn it down, I said, and opened the door. The conference room door opened again, and Miranda Cross walked in with the quiet authority of someone who'd bought and sold companies before breakfast. She didn't announce herself, didn't need to. Half the room recognized her immediately. The other half sensed the shift in power dynamics as executives straightened in their chairs. Ms. Cross, Grant stammered, his face cycling through white, red, and a sickly green. I wasn't expecting we discuss next week. Plans change, Miranda said coolly, taking a seat directly across from him. Please, don't let me interrupt. I believe Ms. Hale was about to show us something important. Sophie's laptop was already connected to the main screen. With a few clicks, she pulled up the first document, my original patent application for the personalized customer journey model, dated 3 years ago, with my name clearly listed as sole inventor. This is the original filing, Sophie said, her voice carrying across the dead silent room. Note the timestamp March 15th, 3 years ago, at 2:47 a.m. Lena Foster, sole creator. She clicked again. Grant's first mention of the model in any company document 14 months later. Mr. Huxley's first reference to the model comes over a year after Ms. Foster's patent filing. Interesting how innovation works, isn't it? This is ridiculous, Grant sputtered. Patents can be filed by anyone. Which is why I have more. Sophie pulled up email after email, a cascade of evidence. Here's Ms. Foster's development notes, 200 pages of mathematical proofs and algorithmic designs. Here's the GitHub repository with her personal commit starting 4 years ago. Here's the authentication protocol, Mr. Huxley. Would you mind logging into the system to show us the full model? Grant's fingers fumbled with his laptop. The system is... There must be a technical issue. There's no issue, I said, standing for the first time. The model requires biometric authentication that only I possess. You've been trying to sell something you can't even access. Sophie continued relentlessly. But it's not just about the model. Let me introduce you to Grant Huxley's pattern. She pulled up a presentation titled 7 Years of Systematic Theft. Jennifer Reeves appeared on screen, then Emma Fitzgerald, Aaliyah Thompson, Sarah Kim. Each woman's innovation, each theft meticulously documented. The room was so quiet, I could hear the fluorescent lights humming. This is defamation. Grant slammed his hand on the table. I'll sue. With what grounds? Miranda Cross spoke for the first time since sitting down. I've had my legal team reviewing Ms. Hale's documentation for the past week. Every piece is legally obtained, every claim supported by evidence. You, however, attempted to sell me intellectual property you don't own. That's fraud.